Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Shubhangi and Dr. Jagruti and all the members of the organizing committee. For me, it's a pleasure to share the dais with Dr. Pratima Radhakrishnan. I am a student, so I've learned a lot in fetal medicine from her, whatever I tried. So I propose to speak on counseling, which is something that most obstetricians do because falls on their responsibility to do this. Please bear me out if I have left out anything in my talk. So I found this best definition of counseling as a professional assistance regarding a decision or a future of action or a future course of action. This is very different from what we usually do. Counseling means it's not informing, it's more than informing, it's coming to a joint or decision. So it involves two things broadly: rightly understanding what the problem is, the anomaly is, and then taking the appropriate action. And the understanding involves the precise nature of the anomaly, the etiology, the associated structural abnormalities, genetic or chromosomal abnormalities which could be associated, additional investigations that might be required to clarify the defect, and finally the prognosis, whether is it lethal, is it correctable, are there any special needs, what will be the quality of life. These are the questions that most parents want you to answer when you counsel them. So once they've understood the entire thing, then it's about taking the appropriate action, and that could be termination of pregnancy, it could be selective reduction if it's a multiple pregnancy, or it could be hysterectomy if she's got a previous cesarean uterine scar. The fetal investigations or interventions you'd want to know what's the cost, what are the complications, the outcomes, where it would be done, and after birth, what would be the neonatal interventions required in terms of surgery or investigations or whatever, follow-up. If it is not possible to correct, then what is the palliative care, what is the rehabilitation involved, and finally, what are the financial implications. So these are things that have to be built in the decision making for a patient to come to a. Counseling requires an unhurried discussion. It involves helping the patient to see things more clearly from a different perspective than what they already have. They have some misguided concepts or guilt or remorse or whatever. It has to be evidence-based, and evidence keeps on changing. Data keeps on, we keep having new guidelines. It requires some skills, that's listening, questioning, and empathy. You've got to be able to handle emotional reactions like shock, anger, misplaced guilt. You have to be very careful about speaking about some reports from some other person. And at some point, you might need a referral to a geneticist, a pediatric cardiologist, or a pediatric surgeon, or a cardiovascular surgeon, and a number of other people. Counseling is not giving advice. It's not being judgmental. It is not attempting to sort out the problems of the patient. We cannot tell a patient to undertake a course of action. We have to help the patient to take a decision, and that patient has to stand by her or their decision. We need to be not emotionally involved with the patient, and we have to look at a patient from her perspective, not your perspective or your past experience, or not what you did last time. Now, who should counsel? Now, a whole lot of people come in contact with the patient. Typically, it's a radiologist who comes with a report which shows some evidence of a defect. The fetal medicine consultant is the best person to counsel because he or she is knowledgeable and can guide appropriately. Usually, it falls to the lot of the obstetrician because we are the primary caregivers. A patient wants to know from us what would be the best course of action, and we need help from a fetal medicine consultant, a geneticist, or even a neonatologist. There could be a whole lot of other people involved. I found this a very brilliant idea in BFMC that trained counselor counseling the couple in a very unbiased way, so they can get a whole range of views and opinions and help them come to terms with the anomaly. And before we go to the whole gamut of all the different anomalies, this is a reality that we need to know. Anomalies can be missed. Now, there can be a whole lot of different anomalies that can be missed. There could be cardiac or posterior cranial fossa, limb, digits, ear, etc., etc. Most reports have disclaimers about uh, about missing an anomaly, and that different factors in the mother could prevent us from detecting all anomalies. Now, there can be a number of reasons for these disclaimers. There can be a number of reasons for missing an anomaly, such as a scan done too early, or a hurried examination, or a number of other factors. But we need to all understand that it is unrealistic to expect ultrasonography to detect all anomalies. And whenever a report is given to us by a patient, we should never give broad sweeping statements saying that this is completely normal, there is nothing to worry, everything is fine. It should be stated in very plain terms that whatever has been examined has no anomaly has been found, and there is still a likelihood of some anomalies which could be missed. Now, what are the possible outcomes? You can have a number of this is not an exhaustive list, but you can have a range of options. An anomaly could be lethal, not compatible with survival, or there could be survival with a very poor quality of life and morbidity. There could be survival only after requiring neonatal surgery, or there could be survival with handicap, illness, or recurrent surgery. So we have to be very careful about these things. The first one, there is some solace in the fact that there's some inevitability of the outcome. So even if it is missed, a couple can realize that it was inevitable. The most dangerous things to miss are the last three anomalies. And these three require a lot of counseling on the part of the obstetrician and the fetal medicine consultant. Now, just a list of all the lethal or severe anomalies that are incompatible with survival: anencephaly, bilateral renal agenesis, polypoprosencephaly, the dysplasias, trisomy 13 and 18, triploidy, severe pulmonary hyperplasia, body stock abnormalities, and hypoplastic heart syndrome. Fetal anomalies with poor quality of life, agents of corpus callosum, especially if it is complete, Dandy-Walker syndrome, spina bifida, rhombencephaly, all the cortical disorders, non-immune hydrops, Epstein anomaly, high airway obstruction, and some skeletal dysplasias. And some anomalies are strongly associated with aneuploidy, and we need to be aware that you should be doing karyotyping or testing in these anomalies. CNS defects, head neck defects, non-immune hydrop skeletal dysplasias, certain cardiac defects, diaphragmatic hernia, esophageal and diurnal anal atresias, echogenic bowel, omphalocele, horseshoe kidneys, megacystis, and pylectasia. Cardiac anomalies with bad prognostic factors, associated cardiac anomalies, chromosomal abnormalities, univentricular anatomy, hypoplastic left heart syndrome, single outflow tract, aortic atresia, DORV with outflow, tetralogy of Fallot, severe regurgitations, and a progressing lesion, and finally a low birth weight or a preterm delivery makes things very difficult for neonatal surgery. Anomalies that require tertiary care delivery, so that a neonate which crashes can be immediately managed by specialized neonatal ICUs and taken up for surgery as early as the baby is stabilized, are duct-dependent systemic circulations, duct-dependent pulmonary circulations, transposition of great arteries, TAPVC, severe Epstein's anomaly, and certain complex anomalies. Now we go to CNS anomalies, which you can see that a whole lot of them are associated with chromosomal abnormalities. They can be, some of them are associated with infections. There are additional structural anomalies which can be picked up by ultrasonography as well as MRI. There's a nice algorithm which I found in the Journal of Fetal Medicine. So you can broadly define a CNS defect as having poor prognosis, variable prognosis, and good prognosis. All of them need to undergo a pedigree screening and genetic counseling. A detailed ultrasonography for extracerebral and cerebral anomalies, and MRI to confirm whether there are any additional cerebral abnormalities. And once all this has been confirmed, then a karyotyping and chromosomal microarray can be done. We go to skeletal dysplasias. So fetuses with long bone measurements which are less than 5th centile or more than 3rd standard deviation below the mean, head circumference more than 75th centile, angulation or deformity of long bones, and femur length, foot length ratio less than 0.8, thoracic circumference less than 5th percentile, and the chest abdominal ratio less than 0.6 would indicate a skeletal abnormality. Now, most of these, luckily, most of the severe skeletal dysplasia are detected at the 18 to 20 week scan, but the non-lethal ones may not be evident until 28 weeks onwards. The key predictors of lethality at 18 to 20 weeks are chest to abdominal ratio less than 0.6, femur length to abdominal ratio less than 0.16, femur length to BPD ratio less than the third standard deviation below the mean, hydrops, and a severe decreased demineralization of the axial skeleton. Karyotype microarray is mandatory in all these cases, and it is important to store the DNA sample for future reference. I'll quickly run through the other anomalies, prognostic factors for CPAM, which is the lung area, or the CCAM volume ratio. Presence of a dominant cyst, presence of hydrops would indicate a poor abnormality. Most of these are not associated with any chromosomal abnormalities, and most of them do very well, very reassuring for a patient relatives. For congenital diaphragmatic hernia, presence of the lung-heart ratio, lung-head ratio is a very important prognostic marker for the outcomes, and it overrides the presence of liver, which was considered. Presence of liver in the thorax was considered to be a very bad prognostic sign. That the LHR overrides the presence of liver in the thorax. Presence of hydrops and abnormal karyotype will also change the prognosis. Hydrothorax is associated with, very highly associated with abnormal karyotypes, associated cardiac and CNS malformations, and non-immune hydrops. Omphalocele, esophageal, duodenal atresias are very commonly associated with abnormal karyotype, typically Down syndrome. Jejunal atresias usually have a good outcomes, except for those which have got multiple site atresias, or in the case of apple peel kind of an appearance. Most of them have normal karyotype. Anal atresia again is associated with abnormal karyotype aneuploidies and associated with a number of anomalies and syndromes. Echogenic bowel, typical sign of Down syndrome and other associated abnormalities. We then go to the urinary tract abnormalities. So hydronephrosis that is associated with bladder dilation, that's megacystis, would mean either urethral obstruction or a UV reflux. With bladder distension would be posterior urethral valve or bladder VU reflux. And if there is no bladder dilatation, then it would be a distal ureteric obstruction. So some important markers of outcomes. When you find a renal pelvic diameter more than 40 millimeters, almost 100% chance that the child will require surgery, pyeloplasty after birth. So a very good guideline for determining which child will need surgery. Fetal megacystis is associated with a number of chromosomal and a number of other anomalies, and when you've ruled all of them, you come to a diagnosis, you come to a finding of LUTO, or lower urinary tract obstruction, which can be diagnosed by this scoring system. Basically, that includes severe megacystis, bilateral ureteric dilatation, diameters which are 1.3 points per millimeter, oligo or anhydramnios, male sex, referral before 28 weeks. LUTO is staged as mild, moderate and severe based on the amniotic fluid volume and the bladder volume. So if you have a normal amniotic fluid volume till 36 weeks, it's termed as mild. If the bladder volume is less than 5.4 ml and there is normal amniotic fluid at 20 weeks, this is termed as moderate. And grossly enlarged bladder with oligohydramnios and anhydramnios before 20 weeks is very bad, severe LUTO. As you can see, the severe ones have got very bad outcomes, almost 55% perinatal mortality. The mild ones have about 8, and even some of them require surgery after childbirth. So in summary, I just want to point out that counseling is an evidence-based understanding of anomalies and its possible outcomes to enable appropriate investigation and non-directive, self-determined, timely decision by the patient. A thorough evaluation by a fetal medicine consultant is mandatory. Associated abnormalities and abnormal karyotype determine the prognosis. And a normal report does not mean that a fetus is normal. There could still be missed anomalies, a reality which we need to keep in mind. Thank you.